Hello everyone. Thank you all for watching the video. Wishing you all good health and peace. The dawn was a faint blush over the hills when Diep stepped from her shack, her bamboo basket heavy with purple sweet potatoes, their skins dusted with earth from James's fields. The path to the market wound through the village, red and slick under her worn sandals, gleaming from the night's rain. The air carried the scent of dew and pine, mingling with the distant hum of a waterfall that never slept. Roosters crowed, their calls sharp against the morning's hush, and a child's laugh echoed from a nearby house, fading into the mist. Diep's breath misted in the cool air, but her heart bore a weight no basket could hold. Yesterday, James's father had spoken, his words a blade that had cut through her dreams, and now she walked with their echo, heavy as the earth after a storm. She paused where the path dipped toward the stream, its waters catching the first rays like scattered coins. Setting her basket down, she knelt, the potatoes rolling softly against one another, their deep purple a quiet beauty against the damp soil. The water was cold as she cupped it in her hands, its chill biting her palms, grounding her thoughts. This was where James had stood with her months ago, his hand warm in hers, his voice bright with promises. "These fields, Diep," he'd said, pointing to the land that stretched wide under the mountain's watchful gaze. "They're ours. We'll build a life here, fields, a home, maybe children someday." She'd believed him then, her heart as open as the sky, thinking love could root as deeply as the crops they tended. But yesterday, his father had torn that hope apart, his voice low and final. "You're a good girl, but not for my son." Diep lingered by the stream, her reflection wavering. A girl with dark eyes and calloused hands, her hair tied back with a frayed ribbon her mother had once worn. She thought of her mother, gone these many years, who taught her to plant by the moon's phases, to husk corn with care, to carry on when the world grew heavy. "You're stronger than you know," her mother had said, her hands rough but gentle, and Diep clung to those words now, letting them anchor her against the pain that surged like a flood. James's father had sat across from her, his face weathered but kind at first, offering rice and meat as if they were old friends. She'd thought him a worker, someone James had hired, until he'd leaned forward and said, "I'm James's father." The words had frozen her, and what followed had shattered her. "You're poor, illiterate, and you've been married before," he'd said. "Find someone of your own kind. Don't climb too high or you'll fall hard." She hoisted her basket, the potatoes shifting with a soft thud, and continued toward the market. The village was waking, its rhythm as familiar as her own heartbeat. Smoke curled from thatched roofs, weaving patterns in the dawn, and the scent of boiling rice mingled with the tang of charcoal and dew-soaked grass. Her shack lay just beyond the bend, its bamboo walls weathered but steadfast, a small world she'd carved out alone. She pictured Hockey, her little dog, waiting there, his tail a blur of joy at her return, and the thought brought a fleeting warmth, but it couldn't quiet the ache that had settled in her chest, heavy as the earth after rain. She'd fled yesterday after his father's words, leaving the door open, Hockey alone, unable to face the walls that held her dreams. At the market, Diep spread her mat under a tamarind tree, its leaves whispering secrets to the breeze. "Sweet potatoes fresh from the fields," she called, arranging the tubers in neat piles, their purple skins catching the light like dusk trapped in earth. Her voice rang clear, but beneath it trembled a sorrow she hoped no one heard. Buyers drifted by, their voices a soft hum. Some haggled, others offered smiles that felt like small blessings. An old woman, her face etched like the bark of an ancient tree, picked up a potato and nodded. "Good harvest, child," she said, pressing a crumpled bill into Diep's hand. "Your mother would be proud." Diep swallowed, her throat tight. Her mother had loved the market, loved the chatter and the bustle, teaching Diep to weigh each sale with care, to see worth in the smallest things. Now she needed that lesson more than ever, when her own worth had been weighed and found wanting. The sun climbed, burning away the mist, and Diep's pile of potatoes shrank. She wiped sweat from her brow, her thoughts drifting to yesterday's meal, the rice steaming, the meat tender, the man's voice gentle until it turned sharp. "Poverty isn't a sin," he'd said, "but you must know your place." She'd wanted to argue, to tell him her heart was worth more than his wealth, that love didn't measure in coins or degrees. But her tongue had stayed still, pinned by the fear that he was right, that she was reaching for a star that would burn her. She'd nodded, her hands folded in her lap, and when he left she'd slipped away, her steps carrying her to the hills where no one could see her tears. She thought of James now, somewhere in the village, unaware of his father's words. He was at the foot of the mountain she knew, discussing his company, buildings rising near Tieu, investments in dried fruit and new fields. She'd overheard him last week, his voice steady as he spoke of rewarding his workers with bonuses, of building something lasting. He'd asked her once to join him, to leave the market for his office, but she'd shaken her head, brushing dirt from her skirt. "I'm no good with papers, James," she'd said. "I belong here with the earth, with people." He'd smiled, but she'd seen the flicker of doubt in his eyes, as if he feared she'd never fit the world he was shaping. And now, his father had confirmed that fear. His words a wall she couldn't climb. A voice broke her thoughts. "Diep, 2 kilos. A woman called, her basket full of greens. Diep moved automatically, weighing the potatoes, her hands steady despite the storm inside. 10,000 dong, she said, forcing a smile, and the woman nodded, her coins clinking softly. Diep watched her go, her heart aching for the simplicity of these moments, when a sale was just a sale, not a reminder of all she couldn't be. She thought of her childhood, running through bamboo groves with her brother, chasing fireflies under a sky that seemed endless. Back then, love was a laugh shared over a stolen mango, a hand to hold when the nights grew cold. Now it was a battle, and she wasn't sure she had the strength to fight. As noon burned bright, Diep's pile dwindled to a few potatoes, their purple skins warm from the sun. She sat back, her hands idle, and let her gaze drift to the hills. She thought of her grandmother, who told stories of bamboo flutes carved from rice stalks, blown to call the rain when drought scorched the land. "The gods listen," her grandmother had said, her eyes crinkling with faith, and as a child, Diep had believed it, blowing tunes until her breath ran dry. Now she wasn't sure what she believed, only that she loved James with a fierceness that scared her, and she'd fight to keep him, if he'd fight for her too. Dusk settled, painting the market in shades of gold and shadow. Diep packed her empty basket, her movements slow, deliberate. The village was quiet now, its bustle giving way to evening's hush. Fireflies blinked in the distance, and the air carried the scent of jasmine and wood smoke, wrapping her in a fleeting peace. She started home, the path familiar under her feet, but each step felt heavier, as if the earth itself were pulling her back. Her shack came into view, its walls a patchwork of bamboo and memory, and she braced herself for the emptiness inside. Hockey would be there, she knew, but after yesterday, even his warmth might not be enough. She thought of James, of the moment he'd found her gone. He'd come last night, she was sure, carrying fruit from the market, his voice calling her name. "Diep, Diep, where are you?" She pictured him standing in the open doorway, hockey at his feet, his confusion deepening as the hours passed. Did he know what his father had said? Would he fight for her? Or would he bow to the weight of family, of wealth, of a world she'd never belonged to? She didn't know, and the not knowing was a wound that bled with every step. Her shack was dark when she reached it, the door still ajar from her flight. Hockey bounded out, his yips shattering the silence, and she knelt, burying her face in his fur. "You're all I've got, little one," she whispered, her voice breaking. "You don't care that I'm poor, do you?" Hockey tilted his head, his eyes bright with a loyalty that needed no words, and for a moment she felt lighter, as if his warmth could hold her together. Inside, she lit the stove, the flames casting shadows that danced like ghosts of her past. She sliced greens, their bitterness sharp in the air, and set rice to boil, but her hands trembled, betraying the calm she tried to hold. The book on the table caught her eye, a worn primer she'd borrowed, its pages filled with words she struggled to grasp. She traced the cover, her fingers lingering on the faded ink. She'd wanted to learn to grow, not just for James but for herself, for the girl who'd once dreamed of more than baskets and fields. Her mother had never learned to read, but she carried a wisdom deeper than words, teaching Diep to listen to the earth, to trust her own heart. Now that heart was torn between love and fear, between holding on and letting go. She thought of her first marriage, a brief, bitter chapter that had ended years ago, leaving her with nothing but lessons in resilience. James's father had used it against her, as if it defined her, but she refused to let it be her shame. She stepped outside, hockey at her heels, and looked up at the sky. The moon hung low, its light spilling through the trees, painting the ground in silver. She thought of the stories her mother had told, of women who'd loved against the odds, who'd faced scorn and stood tall. The heart knows its own path, her mother had said, and Diep wanted to believe it, wanted to trust that her love for James was enough. But his father's words lingered sharp as thorns. "You're not worthy of my son." She spoke to the night, her voice barely a whisper. "Poverty isn't a sin, is it, Hockey? I didn't choose this life, but I chose him. Isn't that enough?" Sleep came fitfully, broken by the rustle of leaves and Hockey's soft whines. In her dreams she saw James's father, his eyes unreadable, standing at the edge of the market, his words a chant. "You're not enough." She reached for James, but he was gone, leaving only the sound of water rushing over stones, endless and cold. She woke to dawn's first light, her body weary but her resolve flickering, a small flame that refused to die. She rose, fed Hockey, and packed her basket once more. The potatoes wait a familiar companion. The market awaited, the village awaited, life awaited. As she stepped onto the path, the mist curling around her like a shawl, she thought of James's father. His words had cut deep, but they hadn't broken her, not yet. She thought of James, of the love that had rooted her here, fragile but fierce. Would he stand by her, or would his father's will pull him away, leaving her with nothing but the earth she'd always known? Diep didn't know. The path stretched ahead, winding through hills that held both her past and her future. She shifted her basket, its weight grounding her, steadying her steps. Today she'd sell her potatoes, smile at strangers, and carry on, her heart a quiet drumbeat against the morning's song. But in that heart a question lingered, soft as moonlight, sharp as stone. Would love be enough to hold them together? Or would it slip through her fingers like water from the stream? The answer wasn't here, not yet. It lay somewhere beyond the market, beyond the hills, in a moment she couldn't yet see. For now Diep walked on, her steps steady, her soul a flickering flame that burned against the dawn.